and welcome to Whack-A-Mole Industries. In today's video, I'm working on a project that I have been wanting to do for such a long time. What is this project, you may be wondering? Well, it's an old vintage knife. Now it's a stacked leather handle which has dilapidated over the years, and what I'm guessing happened is it was exposed to the elements that the leather started to disintegrate and separate, and as it separated, it wobbled more on the tang, which wore away more of the leather, and then the handle just started falling apart faster and faster. The blade was also a little bit rusted up, but before starting this video, I cleaned up a lot of that. There's still a little bit that needs to be cleaned up though. So what's some of the background history of this knife? Well, it was given to me. The best I can tell from the stamping that's between the guard and the knife blade is there's some stamping that looks like it says K-bar, Orlean, NY. That's all the information that's on that knife. So looking at the outline of the knife and that information, I tried to find information online, and from what I can tell, it's probably not a fighting knife, even though it's made by K-bar, but it looks like it was probably a hunting knife. Probably 40s and 50s-ish, around there, very loose time frame. So if you know information about what this knife is, please comment down below. I would like to know more about what this knife is, because it'd be cool to know that. Also, make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe. Both of things help the channel and help you keep up to date as different projects and videos come out on Whack-A-Mole Industries. So the first step to restoring this knife into good, usable condition is actually the disassembly of the knife. And kind of that comes with a little bit of a heartbreak, because I feel like I'm destroying something, but really it's not usable in the condition it's at right now. At least comfortably and in a usable way. So the first process is I have to disassemble the handle. Now, when I started doing this, I wasn't quite sure on how to disassemble this knife. Often the metal butt plate that goes over the top of the wood butt, it's often like peened over or something like that. So that's what I was expecting to have happen here, especially I've seen some of the K-bar fighting knives and stuff seem to be that way. So I was going about planning on taking my Dremel and cleaning off that burr, but there was none. So I'm trying to loosen that butt plate after I've done a little bit of grinding, but it's not budging. It's like something else is holding it. So I slide down, there's like 3 different colored discs, like a black, or orangish, reddish, and then another black one. They're not leather. I don't think they're wood. They're kind of like they're plastic, but I'm not sure. Again, this is like my first knife restoration, and I'm not like super knowledgeable about knives. So if you know what these discs are, I'd be curious to find out what, so please let me know in the comments, because I'd like to learn. And also at this point, hit the thumbs up button. Now let's get back into it. So I'm sliding down those discs, and as I'm trying to also remove that plate from off the knife butt, the wood part does crack and break off. There were already cracks in it, probably because it was exposed to weather at the same time. That probably is the same cause why the leather discs broke down the stacked leather. So that did break, and I was kind of expecting that to happen going into it, kind of a casualty of the knife restoration. But once that was removed, I can see that it's actually threaded. So I did take some channel locks, and I was able to just unthread the metal butt off the knife. At this point, I can slide off those 3 discs, all what was left of the stacked leather, and then there were another 3 discs before the guard of the knife. So I slide those off and the guard, and what I'm left with is just the knife blade and the tang. So to try to clean this up gently, I was trying to get off a little bit more rust without doing a ton of sanding, because again, I'm trying to keep some of the natural patina and history of this knife, as in that it's an old knife and it's seen wear and use. So what I did do is I took a tray, put a little bit of white vinegar in, soaked the knife blade in it, and then after it's soaked for, I think it was two days, I think maybe a day, somewhere around there. I let it soak for quite a while. I took it out, brushed it up, wiped it off, and that was it. I wasn't going to do much more for cleaning up the rust. I just already had cleaned the blade, by the way, before the making of this video, so the worst of the rust was already gone. But now the knife pretty well ready to go, installing the parts back onto the knife. So the first part that obviously needs to go on is the guard. So I cleaned the rust off the guard and slid that on. And then those 3 discs will go on. But what we have to do now is I got to come up with the leather. So what I ended up using for the leather was a 100% leather belt that I had laying around in my miscellaneous parts and pieces bin. By the way, just collecting a bunch of random things is actually helpful, just as long as you don't get too much of it. So I took that leather belt, and it was perfect width too for the handle. Gave me a little bit of extra I could carve off to get to the shape, but not too much, so I didn't have to do a lot of like cutting the sides or whatever. There are apparently blanks online you can buy for making stacked leather, but I was trying to use what I had. So then I took that leather, cut it into, I think it was about 1 1/4. Some of them were slightly shorter, and the shorter ones were going either near the front of the knife, just behind the guard, or just behind the butt of the knife on the back of the knife. That kind of gave a natural like swoop from underneath the hand to give a better grip. So at that point, I kind of was getting an idea of the shape of the knife. So I took each of those pieces, blanks of leather that were going to go into the stack of leather after I cut them, but I needed to make a hole that would fit the tang. It's not a round hole, so it's not like I could just drill a simple hole. But that didn't stop me from trying to drill a hole. It wasn't probably the best approach. I learned this later that there was another approach that worked better, but I stacked up the leather and put it in a clamp to hold them all stacked up. Then I measured out how far I needed to drill through, which kind of worked until I flipped it over and I saw the bottom piece of leather. The hole was a little bit off size. It was a little smaller, a little farther off to one side and near the bottom, because as the leather can shift, it's very flexible compared to wood and steel that you put in a drill press. So the first few kind of worked with. So then I was like, okay, I need another solution to make this groove in the leather, and that's when I came up with using my hand chisel. So I made sure that was good and sharp. It's just a wood chisel. Nothing fancy. And I took a scrap piece of wood, laid it down on my workbench, took each of the blanks of leather, and just punched it out by hand. I didn't even need to use a hammer. I think at the beginning I started using a hammer, but I could just take the chisel and kind of lean into it, and it just cut right into the leather. And I have to do a few cuts, but then eventually I do end up with a rectangular shape. Now some of them on either end of that rectangular shape were a little rough and didn't want to slide easily over the tang. I did take that back to the drill press and just held onto it and just used the drill bit almost as a milling bit, just to eat away a tiny bit of that leather, just to give a cleaner end to it. Now I have a good shape and I can start stacking the leather. I did test fit everything first, just to make sure everything kind of fit together before I started gluing everything up. So I took all of that leather, glued up each piece. That took a little bit. Actually, I forgot something right here. I actually sanded the leather first to make sure I had a good grip, because one side of the leather was polished from being enveloped. Anyways, back to the glue up. So I glued up each of those pieces, stacked them in, and then I had to be a little creative in clamping it to hold it together while the glue dried. I tried a few different clamps, and eventually I put it in my vise, and then put a piece of wood on the end to kind of put pressure on the leather, so I could clamp it all together. The trick was also trying not to bend the tang while I was clamping it to squash the leather together, because I needed the leather to compress and then let the glue set. So now that the glue was set, I had to go about making the wood part of the butt. So I did have a piece of hardwood. Originally I was thinking about using some oak, but when the old butt piece of the wood broke at the butt of the knife, the wood part, yeah, kind of weird name, but when it breaks apart, it was like a dark wood, and I was thinking, okay, this is like a walnut or something like that. I'm going to try to match it if I have any scraps of anything laying around that I can use. So I actually found what I think might be walnut from the windowsills of our house. Our house is 100 and something years old, so it's really old wood. I actually cut off a little chunk of it, I think it's walnut, and had to shape it. Now the first time I did it, it was really annoying. First it was undersized, then I broke it right along the grain. It was really kind of annoying. So I had to make a second one. And the second one did turn out, fortunately. So I cut it to the rough shape, slid it over. I cut it to the rough shape, slid it over the threaded part of the tang of the knife. So then I threaded on the metal part of the butt of the knife onto the thread and tightened it all up good and tight. By the way, I did put glue between the leather, those 3 discs, and that wood part of the butt. So I tightened that all up, and then I took it to the sander and cleaned up the wood to get it to the shape that I wanted it to. The first time I added left a little bit of extra wood on the butt of the knife, but I did eventually reshape that to make it a little more pleasing to the eyes. So I got that part roughed in. Now it was time I needed to rough the leather in. Now I didn't know quite what to do. I've seen people use a bandsaw, but I didn't have a bandsaw to use for this project. So I went to trying to use a handsaw. That worked, but I didn't understand the consequences of that when I went about to do it. Because once I cut it, I'm kind of spoiling it here for you guys, but I nicked it in a little too deep in like 1 or 2 parts, which is gonna be like a scar to remind me of my mistake because I didn't want to remove that much leather. But I got it to the approximate size I needed. By the way, the whole time I was clamping it between 2 pieces of wood in the vise to help protect the blade so I wasn't gonna mess the blade up. But anyways, the best way I found to actually shape this leather once I had the excess, the excessive excess, if that makes any sense, of the leather, was to actually use a razor blade. Putting a brand new sharp razor blade in there, it actually shaves off pretty easily. So you can actually almost whittle the knife into shape. And then I took a very coarse sandpaper, I think like a 60 grit, and then just cut out a big chunk of it and then just kind of clamped it down and then used it kind of like a saw with both hands and worked it down to give the rounded profile of the knife handle that I was looking for. Then, after I got it roughed into shape, I took finer sandpaper and worked it down. And at this point I also finished shaping the wood butt part of the knife, and I had the rough overall shape of the knife and it was looking good. It was looking like I was expecting it. So to finish this off, I needed some sort of wax or some sort of material to kind of waterproof it and kind of give it a finished appearance. I did add a tiny bit of color to darken it, and what I ended up using was some Old English, it's just the Old English dark oil. I didn't use very much of it because otherwise it turned it very, 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 very dark. I didn't want it that dark. Then to seal it, I used this butcher block conditioner. Why a butcher block conditioner? Because obviously this is not a butcher block, this is a knife handle. Well, one reason is it's food grade. Second reason, I already had it. And third, it's great for sealing natural things like wood. It's made up of beeswax, another type of wax, and mineral oil. So it's pretty simple, and it seemed like it would soak really well into the leather and the wood, which it did. It did a great job of that. So I just put a ton of it in, rubbed it in, and I actually ended up then sanding it again with a very fine sandpaper and put a little bit more oil on, worked that in, and then I ended up putting the buffer wheel on my Dremel because I don't have a buffer, so just worked with what I got. And just worked on buffing it out, both the wood part of the handle and the stacked leather part of the handle. And it ended up turning out great. So the imperfections unfortunately are still there, but it's a little bit of patina, if you will. It could have gotten that if those weren't brand new, the handle wasn't brand new, it could have gotten that from being dropped or something hitting or all of the above. So it just kind of matches with the aged blade of the knife. So it's not the end of the world. You know, here's some photos of the finished knife. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's very usable now. I think it looks good. And definitely doesn't look like a brand new knife, but I did not want it to look like a brand new knife. Again, it's quite an old knife, and I just kind of want to respect the age of the knife and the history of the knife. It was great to finally get this knife fixed up and ready to be able to be used again, and just give it new life again. So please make sure to hit the thumbs up button, comment down below, and subscribe. All of those things really help this channel and also help you because you can keep up to date as these videos come out. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, all those, that's what the comment section down below is for. Or just to say hi, I would love to hear from you guys. I always do love hearing from you guys. So make sure to drop a comment down below. We look forward to seeing you guys in a future video, and well, I got some pretty cool things in the works. And I got a new tool. I can't wait to show you guys what that is and what I'm gonna do with it. So, see you guys later.